Well, good evening, folks, and welcome to our home Bible study this evening. We'll be looking at Genesis chapter 16. Now, if you recall, last time we looked at chapter 15, which gives us the record of the fourth appearance of God to Abram that's described in the Abraham saga. And we had the covenant cutting ceremony where Abram divided these animal parts into two piles, and as he spent the afternoon driving the buzzards off the dead carcasses and parts, as it got dark, Abram fell into a deep sleep and sort of a trance kind of thing, and a smoking or smoldering fire pot and a burning torch passed through between those pieces as God entered into that covenant to ratify the promises, going back to chapter 12, and he's enlarged them. Each time he appears to Abram, he enlarges them. And one of the things that he confirms to Abram in chapter 15 that is necessary in understanding chapter 16 is that he tells him that his heir will not be Eliezer of Damascus, one of his slaves, but will be a son who will be born biologically, verse 4 of chapter 15, to Abram. The thing is, God doesn't specify in chapter 15 that Sarai, or Sarah as we know her, will be the mother. And so time passes, and they're having to still wait for that child of promise, and for Abram to be an exalted father in reality, because he hasn't got any children. And so time is passing. And that will take up the reading in chapter 16 now, which is a pretty short chapter. Now Sarai, or Sarai, either way you want to say it, it's multiple choice. Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children. And she had an handmaid, that is a slave, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold, now the Lord has restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be a wife. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. That is, she looked with contempt upon her mistress Sarah. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong, or the wrong done me, be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom, and when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. That is, she looked upon me with contempt. The Lord judge between me and thee. And Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, the maid is in thine hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly or harshly with her, she fled from her face. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain on the way to Shur, which is in the direction if she was going back to Egypt. And he said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, from where camest thou, and where wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, and it shall not be numbered, for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard thy affliction. Yishmael in Hebrew means God shall hear. And he will be a wild man or the RSV even says a wild ass of a man, or in the Hebrew it could even be a wild horse of a man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence, or literally in the face of all his brethren. And she called the name of the Lord who's spoken to her. Notice it's the angel of the Lord, but he's really the Lord who's spoken to her. Thou God seest me. That is El Roy, the God of seeing, is what it really says. For she says, have I also seen him that seeth me? Wherefore the well, that's the fountain of water, was called Bir Lahairoi, that is the well of the one who lives and sees. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old, when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Okay. Short chapter, a lot of stuff here. A lot of tension in this chapter. Faith, by the way, it can be quite stressful. Probably the common element to faith in anyone's experience who truly lives by faith is the element of struggle. We struggle to trust God for those things that we don't see coming to pass, for those things that that only He can do, that we're dependent upon Him for, and particularly in times when we don't see what God is doing. God knows what He's doing. I don't know what God's doing a lot of times. A lot of times I don't know what I'm doing, but He always knows what He's doing. The stress comes when we don't see Him acting. And we pray and we ask Him and beseech Him for what we want and what we think we need, and then we don't see Him responding, and it becomes a struggle as we have to wait. God doesn't always move immediately, and obviously at this time in chapter 16, it has not been God's perfect timing, His moment of kairos from the New Testament to act at that appointed time. Well, Abram has been told in the previous chapter in that covenant cutting ceremony that he would be the biological father of an heir. But he wasn't told that Sarai would be the mother. By the way, I'm calling her Sarai. The Hebrew word that her name originally literally means domination. And she's dominant. One of the themes in the stories of the patriarchs it's evident here in this chapter. It's evident also later on, but it's very evident in the story of Isaac and Rebekah, and also Jacob and his wives, Leah and Rachel. One of the themes in the stories of patriarchs is the power that women wield around the home. Sarah, when she tells Abram what to do, he does it, and so does Isaac, and so does Jacob. In fact, Jacob, a lot of times when we get over to about chapter 30, Jacob doesn't even know which tent he's going to spend the night in until he gets home from work. Anyway, well, the issue and the struggle is brought up in verse 1. Sarai has no children, and the first time she was mentioned, back in chapter 11 in the genealogy, we were told that she was barren and could have no children. Again, this would have been an important issue for the original readers. If you say that, the Israelites in the wilderness getting ready to go into the promised land, important for those Israelites to have plenty of children so that they could go in and repopulate the land. And also, we also need to see this in light of God's command at the creation, be fruitful and multiply and fill up the earth. And again, that command was repeated after the flood, be fruitful and multiply and fill up the earth. And so it was considered if a couple couldn't have children, it was seen as God's blessing in large part being withheld from them. Well, she has no children, but she has a slave who is an Egyptian. Do you remember when they went to Egypt during a previous lapse of faith, when the famine came right after they had come into the promised land? We didn't read about Abram praying and the Lord told him to go down to Egypt. No, they just did what seemed to make good sense. Let me tell you something. Just because something seems like common sense doesn't necessarily mean it's the will of God. And of course, their experience in Egypt, they left from there with egg on their face as Pharaoh bounced Abram out because they had told Pharaoh and told everybody. Abram had said to Sarah, "Tell him you're my sister. Don't tell him you're my wife." And she was his half sister, as we'll see later. But she was his whole wife. Well, when they left Egypt, a little bit of Egypt came with them. Lot was eaten up with Egypt, and that's why he chose that whole area that was down near the Dead Sea, down near Sodom and Gomorrah. He ends up in Sodom because it was like the river of Egypt. It was like the land of Egypt, we were told. It was like the Garden of Eden. And that played into Lot's choice of that land. And now they've got an Egyptian slave that's Sarah's slave. And again, it becomes a problem in every which way. Egypt is a problem for the people of God in the Old Testament. Well, Sarah comes up with an idea. She says, well, the Lord has restrained me from bearing. Now, one of the things that you have in play in the Old Testament, particularly early on, is God is seen sort of as the cause of his sovereign, his absolute, and whatever happens is kind of falls at the feet of God. And so she says, the Lord has restrained me from bearing. And so she sees that is God is not letting her have children, is the way she views that. And so take my maid and go in to her and have children by her. And Abram hearkens to her voice. I mean, it just matter-of-factly says that he said okay and went right on. Now, in ancient times, in the ancient world, this was not necessarily an unusual thing. You find later on in chapter 30 with Jacob, and of course he has the two wives. He gets married to the wrong girl first. He ends up with Leah and has to work a second 7 years to get to marry Rachel, whom he loves. And then Rachel and Leah have competition sort of going on about who can have the most children. And Leah's, it's still the first inning, and Leah's got about 4 runs because she's got 4 children, and Rachel doesn't have any. And so Rachel says to Jacob, okay, take my handmaid. I forget whether it's Zilpah or Bilhah. I get those mixed up. But anyway, they began to have children with their handmaids on behalf of Leah and Rachel, and the competition just gets blown all out of proportion. Again, God's plan is for a man and a woman, one man, one woman, for a lifetime. And anything beyond that is too many and too much and trouble. Always strife in the home when there's more than one, spouse. And so Abram's wife takes Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian. Notice it emphasizes all of this, the same thing it said in verse 1. It describes her the same way in verse 3. Wants to make real clear who it is that is going to be the surrogate mother for Sarah to have a child that can legally be considered hers. And we're also told that Abram and Sarah they've been 10 years since they came into the promised land. And Abram was 75 when they came, and now he's 85. He's getting on up in years, And so anyway, it seems like that, in verse 4, it didn't take much time. Didn't seem like it. She conceived, and it says when she saw that she conceived, she's, a couple months have gone by, and she's, her monthly cycles has been interrupted, and, maybe she's beginning to show a little bit that she's pregnant, and when she sees and it's confirmed and she knows that she's truly with child, it says her mistress was despised in her eyes. That is, she looked with contempt upon Sarai. Well, now, Sarai is supposed to be the legal mother of this child that's going to be born, and the Hagar is the slave, and so she really doesn't have any rights. She's just property. And but the fact that she is defiant now, and of course, you got all these jealous things going on, between these two women, and Hagar is probably rubbing it into Sarah. Yeah, it really is your fault that y'all didn't have any children, because see, I didn't have any trouble getting pregnant, and be careful what work you give me to do, because, well, you wouldn't know how it is today, Sarah, but I, with child, and I'm just not having a good day, so maybe I shouldn't carry the basket full of clothes out to the clothesline to wash. Maybe you should have to carry those for me, and give me a little lighter job. After all, I am pregnant. I bet you wish you were pregnant like I am, that kind of thing, and she's rubbing it in to Sarah. And Sarah, I can't take it. She already feels bad because she cannot have a child. And so she comes to Abram and she says, verse 5, "It's your fault, Abram. The wrong done me be upon thee. I have given my maid into your bosom." When she saw that she had conceived, she, looked with contempt upon me. I was despised in her eyes. Now the Lord judge between me and you, Abram. She puts Abram right in the middle of it. Look what Abram does. He says to Sarah, "Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee." Abram, smart man. Abram does not get in between those two women. He stays out of the way. He hands it right back to Sarah and says, you deal with her as you see fit. I'm not getting into this. And so Sarah dealt harshly or hardly with her. I don't think she beat her. She probably just gave her extra work to do. And said, well, I'll just keep you scrubbing the floors and doing it and working hard. And I'm gonna really, work the bad attitude out of you. Anyway, so Hagar fled from her face. By the way, the name Hagar means flight. Best I can find. I looked it up, and I couldn't find a Hebrew word that is spelled that way elsewhere in the Old Testament that says to flee, but I looked it up in a dictionary of biblical names, and it says it means flight. Perhaps it is derived from the stories about Hagar, because the only two times that we read about Hagar is here, I think, in chapter 21, and she's fleeing both times. So it could be that the name came to be synonymous with flight or flee. Anyway, I don't really know. But she flees and has taken off. And lo and behold, verse 7, it says, "The angel of the Lord found her by a fountain," or we find out it's a well of water in the wilderness on the way to Shur. It's in the correct way she'd be if she is headed back to Egypt. Runaway slave, going back home. The angel of the Lord. This is the first time in the Old Testament that occurs, that the angel of the Lord is mentioned. The angel of the Lord is to be distinguished from an angel of the Lord. In the Old Testament, many, many times you'll read about the angel of the Lord. And this is the first of the places. But the angel of the Lord is actually the Lord himself. Perhaps with his glory, kind of, if you took the dimmer switch and sort of dimmed his glory down. maybe that's a way to understand the angel of the Lord. Also, the angel of the Lord seems to, when he appears in human form. Another thing to think about, in the Old Testament, when you have angels, whether it's the angel or an angel appearing, they are in human form. You don't have this, pictures of, with wings and all of this stuff for angels. The only ones that are described with wings are the seraphim over in Isaiah 6. And literally, seraphim means burning ones, and they had 6 wings. Cherubim, by the way, are winged animals, like winged lions or winged bulls or oxen with wings. Sort of like the Sphinx over there in Egypt would have been a representation of that type of being. Anyway, and in the ancient world, the cherubim are not really peculiar just to the Old Testament and the Hebrews. Some other ancient and Middle Eastern folks conceived of those as well. Anyway, but the angel of the Lord is God himself. In fact, you'll find it mentions the angel of the Lord, verse 9, the angel of the Lord, verse 10, the angel of the Lord, verse 11. And then when Hagar calls the name of the Lord who spoke to her, notice, it identifies the angel as the Lord who spoke to her. And she says, "Thou, God, seest me, not thou, angel of God." And so the angel of the Lord is to be identified with God himself. Again, this is one of the precursors, or maybe one of the ancient Old Testament rootings out of which something called Trinitarianism might have developed in the New Testament and beyond. Actually, the Trinity not completely hammered out in New Testament times. Some of the ancient, in some of the early church councils, Nicaea and Chalcedon, and some of those where they really kind of systematized, I guess you'd say, the doctrine of the Trinity. But this is perhaps one of the roots of this. Anyway, you find also the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament functions in some of the functioning ways that the Holy Spirit does in the New Testament. And perhaps maybe also a foreshadowing of the incarnation when God actually became a man instead of just God in human form in the person of Jesus Christ. Anyway, you find, again, when you have the angel of the Lord appearing, usually it starts out the angel of the Lord, and then it turns out that the one speaking is actually the Lord himself. This happens, you can sort of see it in chapter 21, the other story that has to do with Hagar, and also in chapter 22. You can see it really clearly when you get to Exodus, in Exodus 3, when Moses is on the backside of the desert tending the sheep of his father-in-law, Jethro. And the angel of the Lord appears to him in a bush that's on fire but not being consumed. And Moses, he talks to himself kind of like I do. "I will turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not consumed." And when he does, the Lord speaks to him. And so the angel of the Lord is to be identified with the Lord, perhaps with his glory dimmed down. Anyway, Hagar is fleeing, and the angel of the Lord finds her. And you'll never be lost from him. And he has a purpose for her in her predicament. And he asks her, "Where'd you come from and where are you going?" And she says, "I'm fleeing from the face of my mistress Sarai." And he says, "Return and submit And then he gives her this promise. I'll multiply your seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. It's interesting. The promise to Abram that he would be father, his descendants would be as numerous as the sand by the seashore and as the stars in the heaven. God is even going to use this, which was a mistake and a lapse of faith on Abram and Sarai's part. He's going to give descendants here. Now, of course, these descendants are going to be enemies of Israel, and are going to complicate things for them down the road, and will surely complicate things around the home for Abram and Sarai after this. And there'll be another time when Abram will Sarai will, and her name will be Sarah by that time, will insist that he drive her away, and so she has to leave with Ishmael. But he makes the angel of the Lord makes a promise of great multiply your seed exceedingly, will not be numbered for multitude, and gives a name for this child, Ishmael, which means God shall hear, because the Lord has heard your affliction. And he will be like a wild horse of a man, or a wild ass of a man. He'll be really wild and really strong. His hand will be against every man, or against every kinsman even, and every man's hand against him. He's going to have a hard life. And he will dwell, now this sounds peaceful, but it's not. He will dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Literally, he will dwell in the face of all his brethren. He'll dwell in the face, lifnei, of all his brethren. Same kind of construction in Hebrew occurs in Exodus 20, verse 3, at the beginning of the Ten Commandments. You will have no other gods, lifnei, no other gods in my face. It's an antagonism kind of thing. To have other gods is to have them in the face, right in God's face, you know. Ishmael is going to be dwelling in the face of his brothers. They'll be against them. It'll be an antagonistic thing. He's going to have a hard life, but he's going to be, have a lot of descendants. And so she calls the name of the Lord who spoke to her, El Roy, the God of seeing. And then she says, have I seen the one that sees me? And it's a question. Again, there's that to God that we cannot quite grasp. He's transcendent. And so the well, the fountain of water where the angel of the Lord came upon her at, is called Bir Lahai Roy, which means the well of the one who lives and sees. And of course, the ancient Hebrews would have known the location between Kadesh and Bered. Well, she goes back and gives birth to a son, and Abram calls his name Ishmael. Again, the name that the angel of the Lord gave to Hagar, I guess she takes it back and tells it to Abram, and he names him that name. Another time when the women have some power. And Abram's 86 years old, getting on up in years. And so the story kind of closes here with them probably assuming that Ishmael is going to be the child of promise. Actually, what they've done is they've complicated God's plan. He will still carry forward his purpose. But the complication is not that they've complicated it for God. They've complicated it for themselves. And strife in the home between those two women. And it's not over with. God doesn't need our help. And sometimes a course of action may just seem like just common sense, that we ought to do this or we ought to do that. We ought to always pray about it. Abram really should have told Sarai when she said, take Hagar and have a child by her. He should have said, well, let me consult with the Lord on this thing, and then we'll decide. Too often, prayerlessness precedes a predicament. Let's always remember, consult the Lord. He's the one that has the plan, and He knows what He's doing. Sometimes we don't know what He's doing, and sometimes we don't know what we're doing. God gave His Son, Jesus Christ, who came and lived and suffered and died and rose again, that if we would trust in Him, He could give us forgiveness, give us a relationship with God, and begin to unfold God's plan in our lives as we trust Him. It involves some struggle, but He'll work it out in our lives if we're willing to trust Him and let Him make the choices and decisions in our lives. Hope you have a good night. Thanks.